be afraid. I came with the energy of Shaka. You go think say I craze. I came as the child of my father. I give thanks and praise. And I came with the spiritual armor. With the anointing spray. First of all, make a call before man will see. There's a silent war up in DRC. If you're poverty born and the through the seek, the new Africa was born to fulfill the dream. Can't forget the powers that's instilled in me. I know said there's powers that been showed in me. I told them from man A to BBC that we the Africans will know where the children need. So fall back, we can pick it up my road.
Get ready.
I stand up with the on the road. I was looking every day, I was sitting on the road. I was looking at my road.
Feel the freshness.
I can never be afraid. I came with the energy of Shaka. You go think say I craze. I came as the child of my father. I give thanks and praise. And I came with the spiritual armor. With the anointing spray. You never ever know what you feel like. Pretend to be someone else in a real life. You can never be yourself cause it feel like for the sake of the salary you had to put your pride to the side. It cost to have a dream. My CV was written in European. Said I was captured through the Euro lens. Too much baggage being African. We used to pretend to Caribbean. Now I feel it in my soul. Do re mi Burkina Faso. But they would never show or give us the glory. The hunter, the hero, to the lion start telling story. I came with the spirit of Sandiata. I can never be afraid. I came with the energy of Shaka. You go think say I craze. I came as the child of my father. I give thanks and praise. And I came with the spiritual armor. With the anointing spray. I came with the spirit of Sandiata. I can never be afraid. I came with the energy of Shaka. You go think say I craze. I came as the child of my father. I give thanks and praise. And I came with the spiritual armor. With the anointing spray.
Welcome to Sona. We are the sons of the new Africa, where the sounds of nature anchor us. From the land of Suya, Okadas, Nkrumah, and Karas. From Sakumono, Ojolegba, Nairobi to Accra's. We sing songs originally narrated by ancestors to create science, ointments, navigations, algebras. We birthed the sojourners, Obasanjo, Nelson, Angelas. We survived oppression, neglect, and adversity. Because we saw opportunity and negotiated advantages. No longer subpar, okay-ish, novice, or amateurs. Black is excellence. African is excellence. We fought against the fires they used to try and burn us. Did they forget that we were children of the sun? So we rose from the ashes, filled with the spirits of the new Africa, where the sounds of nature anchor us. From the stories of naughty and Nazis to surviving overnights of atrocities. This is Sona. This is honor. Because they came for our sounds. Then they came for our organs. They came for our nature. Then they came for Africa. And now it's time we took it back.
Welcome again to another conversation here with me on Let's Talk with Iwerton. My name is Iwerton Longoria for the ones who are joining me live on BitChute, on YouTube, and Rumble. Welcome to the Black Hot Fat Radio Network, media for the 21st century. I hope you had a very restful, productive, fun weekend. However it is, I hope it was actually splendid. Remember, you can download our app on the Google Play Store, stream on www.blackhotfatradionetwork.com for amazing healthy supplements, apparel, clothing with the Black Hot Fat Radio logo on it. Again, my name is Iwerton Longoria, and today's conversation is about how Africa was betrayed. We'll basically go back again. And as we always talk about the puppet leaders who are actually in this position for their own selfish gain, it's always sometimes history repeats itself because there has been a conversation going on in the 254 Nairobi, Kenya, of an influencer who has actually accepted Bill Gates' invite. I think it's for his birthday. I really don't care about that. But from that perspective, it actually makes you question what do you stand for. And a lot of people in the comments actually they understand what's happening. There has been people are really upset about the fact that why you actually accepting this guy's whatever invitation is it for, because you know he's been trying to diminish the African population, mostly the children and the women. It did not sit right with a lot of Kenyans here in the 250 Nairobi, Kenya. But people do things for whatever reason. That was a choice that they made. But it brought me to the conversation of how Africa was betrayed. If I move forward, remember you can download our app on the Google Play Store, stream on www.blackhotfireradionetwork.com for amazing healthy supplements, apparel clothing with the Black Hot Fire Radio logo on it. And I feel and I remember one thing which actually was taken away from us, or because of the different separation that we do have of this little fragmentation of the countries that we do have in Africa. We used to have the theme of I am because we are. That's the Ubuntu. And for African states to become sovereign in their own right, they ought to preserve their people's way of life. And along with crafting a political and economic organization that reflects African value systems. And in the regard, as I said, Ubuntu, I am because we are, speaks to the significance of the community in the individual's life, as well as for the prominence of shared aspiration and mutual support towards a common destiny. In other words, Africans recognize Ubuntu when they see it and encourage those who practice it while castigating those who lack it as having lost their Africanness. And that's what we see when we did have Kenyans coming for that influencer for accepting Bill Gates' invitation. And the vast majority of Africans recognize that they are one with their compatriots spread across the continent and insist that they share similar values along the lines. But this consciousness of being one people hasn't been matched with practical meaning. That's true. An identity at any level aims to offer security in its different forms. Instead, the shared identity of our sense of Africanness has been hollow. The balloon has simply lacked the air to allow it to fly. And a theory of Pan Africanism without practice, as I always talk about it, you have to be really intentional about it, because we also have people who use Pan Africanism as their way to get money out of people. It has become a business for some people. They preach it, but they don't actually live it. They don't even really care about Pan Africanism. They don't really actually care about the Ubuntu. And we always have to look out for such people. They may actually be good speakers and they might speak well. They may actually touch your soul and your emotions with the way they talk about Pan Africanism. But when you dig deeper, they don't intentionally live like that. So this Pan Africanism actually has become something like a theory without actually any practice, and has translated into a plethora of vulnerabilities and generalized sense of insecurities that in some cases has led young people to risking adventures in the Mediterranean among the expression of uncertainty. But we also do know, like, evidently, if the objective is to put into practice the theory, Africans ought to ask themselves, are we one people? And how does that being one people translate into improving the life of the African? Until recently, with the Imagine Pan African initiatives addressing key challenges facing Africans, one will be hard pressed to find systematic approaches that answer this question, whether at the level of social organization, of the ethnic group, the state, regional groupings, or even at the continental level. And this is because Africans have so far failed to organize politically and economically. And we definitely do know why, because we do have a lot of gatekeepers. When you go out there, you start preaching what it is the way it is, your life is at great risk. But you're actually speaking the truth of what's really happening, right? So we've seen this because Africans have so far failed to organize politically and economically in ways that reflect their values system, because people are actually thinking about their own interests. And this statecraft is the responsibility to society that African leaders have given up. derelictions of duty that suggest treason by mimicking foreign models of government. We definitely see that of governance. We actually see that right now it's happening. And secondly, the political and economic questions are intertwined. Indeed, the harmful effects of Africa's economic dependence include the external orientation of the state away from its people towards an external non voting constituency. We all ought to agree that a state that serves foreign interests, that a lot of African countries do, basically, Africa does, except Burkina Faso right now because he's scraped off everything foreign, all the foreign interests. He's naturally de associating himself from everything that has to do with the West. So we do know, like we also agree that a state that serves foreign interests and is therefore externally accountable cannot be a definition or be defined as a democracy or a democratic country for its people or a sovereign state in any meaningful way. So therefore, there cannot be any meaningful democratization or liberation struggle that does not address the issue of economic dependence. We'll come back and talk about the fact that Africa's economic dependence alone could not have produced the stunned democracy observed throughout the continent without the existence of another form of dependence, which is intellectual. But I'll come back. But I'm going to share this video about how Africa was actually betrayed. Let's listen in.
In the misty highlands of central Kenya, a storm brewed in the hearts of the people.
And this is the one and only Jomo Kenyatta, who's by the topic of this is Kenya's founding father, the truth about a British colonial puppet.
It was the early 20th century, and the land that once belonged to the Kikuyu, Maasai, and countless other tribes had been carved up by British settlers, their farms sprawling like wounds across the fertile earth. Dedan Kimathi, a young man born in 1920 under the shadow of colonial rule, grew up witnessing this theft. As a boy, he herded goats on stolen land, his eyes fierce with the fire of resistance. By the 1940s, Kimathi had joined the Kenya African Union, but he saw through the polite petitions and endless negotiations. Land and freedom, he whispered to his comrades in the forests, his voice carrying the weight of generations dispossessed. He became the field marshal of the Mau Mau, the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, leading guerrilla fight.
For the ones who are joining me right now and they're wondering where Joby is, she'll not be joining us at this show for now, but she'll join us later on the next show. That's why I'm actually popping on her schedule.
In a desperate war against the empire. Clad in animal skins, armed with homemade guns and an unyielding spirit, Kimathi struck from the shadows, ambushing patrols and reclaiming dignity one raid at a time. Far across the ocean, in the fog-shrouded streets of London, another Kenyan navigated a different path. Jomo Kenyatta, born Kamau Wangeji in 1897, arrived in Britain in 1929 as a representative of his people, seeking to plead for land rights before the colonial masters. But the city of empires seduced him. He enrolled at the London School of Economics, studying under renowned anthropologists such as Bronislaw Malinowski, who shaped his worldview through the lens of academic detachment rather than revolutionary fervor. Kenyatta mingled with intellectuals, Pan-Africanists, and even Marxists, but his alliances were calculated, his rhetoric polished. He penned Facing Mount Kenya in 1938, a book that romanticized Kikuyu culture but stopped short of advocating for an armed uprising. British intelligence took note. Here was a man who could be reasoned with, a friendly African leader in the making. They groomed him subtly, allowing him to build networks while keeping him at arm's length from true radicals. For nearly 17 years, Kenyatta lived in exile, his life a blend of scholarly pursuits and political maneuvering, far from the blood-soaked forests where Kimathi fought. Back in Kenya, the Mau Mau rebellion erupted in 1952, a tidal wave of anger against land alienation and forced labor. Oaths bound fighters in secrecy, and the British responded with brutal force. detention camps, aerial bombings, and mass executions. Kimathi, evading capture for years, became a legend, his letters from the forest rallying the oppressed. "We fight not for ourselves, but for the unborn," he wrote, his words smuggled through villages. Yet, in Nairobi, Kenyatta publicly distanced himself from the violence. In speeches before his arrest, he condemned the Mau Mau as criminals seeking personal gain, aligning his words with British propaganda that painted the rebels as savages. The colonial authorities, sensing his utility, arrested him in Operation Jock Scott, charging him with managing the rebellion despite intelligence reports confirming his non-involvement. It was a show trial designed to elevate his martyrdom while breaking the real insurgents. Kenyatta's detention in the remote town of Marlal was no harsh ordeal. He lived in relative comfort with books, visitors, and even a garden, a far cry from the torture endured by Mau Mau detainees. Declassified British files hint at a deliberate strategy to groom Kenyatta as the acceptable face of independence, a moderate who would protect settler interests and prevent a radical overhaul. Meanwhile, Kimathi's fate was sealed. Betrayed by
settlers' interests, and it's actually happening right now. We do have the leaders who are actually promoting and protecting foreign interests. Like, the reason why they're in this position, it's because they have been groomed, they have been given terms and conditions how they can protect the interests of the people who, quote unquote, kind of like in a way control Africa. And that's why the Gen Zs are saying no to all this strategic foundation of whoever controls Africa. Like, people don't really care right now. The Gen Zs don't really care about that. They're ready to take everything that was actually taken away from them. And we can see the same notion happening all over the world. We saw a few days ago Morocco actually protesting. We actually saw the same thing happening in Nepal. I believe this is a generation that does not actually line up or does not go with an alignment of who is actually calling the shots. We understand we are the children of the land. So it doesn't make sense someone who does not own the land to control the systems.
By an informer in 1956, he was captured, tried in a kangaroo court, and hanged in 1957, his body buried in an unmarked grave to erase his memory. His execution symbolized the empire's fear of true revolutionaries. By 1961, Kenyatta had emerged from detention, hailed as a hero by crowds chanting Uhuru, the Swahili word for freedom. But behind the scenes, British diplomats orchestrated his rise,
Absolutely.
negotiating terms that preserved economic ties. Declassified UK and US archives reveal frantic discussions on Kenyatta's succession, viewing him as a bulwark against communism in the Cold War era. He was their man, educated, eloquent, and willing to compromise. As Kenya hurtled toward independence in 1963,
willing to compromise. So all the leaders that you see right now in different part of the African continent, they were willing to compromise.
Stage was set for a transfer of power that changed flags but not the chains.
There's a saying that says everybody has a price. So do you have a price for your land, for your people? Do you have a price for that? Because we see that happening right now in a very different way, but the same thing about people partnering with Bill Gates. How would you even think about that? Because the chaos is actually done and cost over the years. It's not something even to actually think about, you know?
Independence dawned on December 12, 1963, with fireworks illuminating Nairobi's skies and crowds swelling in Uhuru Park. Jomo Kenyatta, now Prime Minister and soon President, stood tall, his fly whisk in hand, promising a new era. "We must forgive the past and build together," he proclaimed, his voice booming over the masses. But in the forests, remnants of the Mau Mau emerged, gaunt and hopeful, expecting land and recognition. General
Absolutely.
Baimugi and his fighters laid down arms, lured by Kenyatta's promises of rewards and integration. Instead, betrayal awaited. In 1964, Baimugi was assassinated. Rumors pointed to orders from the top, silencing those who might demand radical change.
That's what we've been talking about. Silence from the top. It's so sad that you were actually so wicked to scrape up your fellow brother and sister. You know, you can always say no. I know they're given ultimatums, but it's actually
Kenyatta's
good to actually be known that you died fighting for the people and for the land instead of actually the fact that you it was actually not it. It's not what people really thought about. It was not about the freedom, it was not about us. And that actually brings us to this conversation right away before I actually move forward with that video. We do have Africa's economic dependence alone could not have produced the stunned democracy observed throughout the continent without the existence of another form of dependence, which is intellectual, like basically abandoning of our way of life, of our way of doing things to adapt everything foreign. And this intellectual dependence is a consequence of Africa's loss of its cultural references as well as the rejection of its value system, and by extension, its way of life, by both Western and African miseducated intellectuals. The miseducation and the subsequent acculturation of the African elite have led us to embrace alien burdens of thought and practice that still stand in the way of Africans' aspiration for independence, economic prosperity, and genuine democracy. In other words, the decision to experiment with outside models has come at the cost of the very independence that Africans have struggled for and hampered any efforts to reorient the state towards serving the interest of its people and preserving their way of life. And that being said, the emerging geostrategic environment provides an opportunity for African leaders to win themselves from this arrangement. The American Sino rivalry on the one hand and the war in Ukraine on the other constituent key factors that are shaping a new global order. As this shift takes place, it offers Africa an opportunity to negotiate a new arrangement, a new arrangement that allows it also to make a strategic shift from the semi-independent status to claim sovereign rights. The promises not kept that was supposed to have taken place half a century ago. But this independence that Africans need is not the kind that relies on alien models of governance. The false start that African leaders made, it is perhaps this display of lack of self confidence, absolutely self-love, self-worth, self-confidence that emboldened colonizers to the possibility that could feign departure but continue to dictate African matters remotely. The UN is actually moving here. Does it ring a bell? The emasculated African leaders could therefore not be expected to deliver independence and found utility in sustaining rather than dismantling colonial institutions. This means that only the confident African leader will grasp the opportunity of a lifetime that the changing global environment provide. Such leaders will recognize central tenets in this reorganization. And one, as sovereign people, have a way of life that they desire to preserve and perpetuate through future generations. Two, this way of life is theorized and codified into laws, institutions, and school curriculums. That makes sense because our educational system doesn't run it at all. At all. It's we're learning everything that doesn't have to do with us. It actually rings a bell when you start questioning things. When you actually start questioning things, you'll start questioning everything, and you'll actually point out like everything doesn't make sense. Nothing empowers me to be a true Pan African. Nothing empowers me to actually have love for the melanated individual that I am. Nothing empowers me to fall in love with Africa. I'm telling you, you'll start questioning why. So we do have Western political thought traces the evolution of aspiration for society from which the prevailing liberal order emanates. Sovereignty in the Western world is understood as protecting this quote unquote way of life. The rise of the Chinese is underpinned by the desire to preserve at home and export abroad the way of life. In fact, when Putin speaks about the current war in Ukraine, the reference to the way of life of the great Russia never escapes him. This begs the question around what grand idea do Africans imagine the evolution of their societies such that any changes that take place in society as a result of engaging with the outside world leave intact the African way of life. It's a good thing to question that. I'll actually get back to that as I continue with this video.
Government labeled the Mau Mau terrorists, maintaining the colonial ban on their organization until decades later. British troops, still lingering, even helped suppress a 1964 army mutiny, underscoring Kenyatta's dependence on his former jailers. The Kapenguria Six, once symbols of unity, fractured under Kenyatta's shadow. Arrested together in 1952 on fabricated charges, witness Rawson Macharia later confessed to being bribed by the British. The group included radicals like Bildad Kagia, Fred Kabai, and Oneko. They had endured hardship for the cause, but upon release, Kenyatta sidelined them. Kagia, a Mau Mau sympathizer, clashed openly over land policies, accusing the president of enriching elites while veterans starved. He died in poverty, his warnings unheeded. Kubai and Kungu Karumba faded into obscurity. Karumba vanished in 1974, whispers of foul play trailing his name. Oneko, daring to oppose the creeping one-party state, was detained in 1969 without trial. Colonial letters hint at deeper treacheries. Informers like Chief Waruhiu had fed information to the British, a tactic Kenyatta seemed to adopt in power. He used the trial's aura to burnish his legend, but abandoned the shared ideals of his comrades. Land, the heart of the struggle, became the ultimate betrayal. Mau Mau fighters had sworn oaths on the soil, vowing to reclaim what was stolen. Yet Kenyatta's regime adopted a willing buyer, willing seller scheme, funded by British loans, allowing wealthy Kenyans, often his allies, to purchase settler farms. A secret 1963 pact with Britain forbade interference with white-owned land, prioritizing compensation for colonizers over the colonized. Freedom fighters petitioned in vain. Their demands met with detention camps echoing colonial horrors. Kenyatta's family amassed vast estates, over 500,000 acres, including tracts allegedly seized from Mau Mau holdings like Northlands. Veterans like General Mweriama died destitute, their bodies frail from neglect. In 1966, Vice President Jaramogi Odinga resigned in disgust, decrying the regime as a betrayal of the independence fight in his memoir, Not Yet Uhuru. Whispers spread through villages. Kenyatta's African socialism was a veneer for cronyism. He centralized power, banning opposition in 1969 and fostering a one-party dictatorship. The Kiambu Mafia, a clique of Kikuyu elites, siphoned wealth, while radicals like Odinga were smeared with Cold War propaganda, aided by Western intelligence. CIA reports from 1964 praised Kenyatta's anti-communist stance, which undermined Pan-African solidarity. Personal myths swirled, rumors of Maasai origins or ghost-written books
Undermine the Pan Africanism sovereignty against that, against Ubuntu, against everything that has to do with us gathering together and reclaiming our land, reclaiming our true freedom. We're gonna go on a short musical break, family. As we come back, we continue with the conversation of the day. Remember, as I always say, you are the change you need to see in the world. Your voice matters as a Pan African, so you definitely have to stand to what really defines you as a true Pan African.
Discover the natural power of ashwagandha, an ancient herb known for its healing properties. For over 3,000 years, ashwagandha has been trusted to reduce stress, increase energy, and improve focus. Our ashwagandha is carefully grown, harvested, and processed to retain its maximum potency. Each root is hand-picked and dried, then ground into a pure organic powder, ensuring the highest quality. Simply mix 1 teaspoon into your favorite beverage or take it in capsule form as prescribed by a healthcare professional. Whether you're looking to balance your stress levels, boost your immune system, or enhance mental clarity, ashwagandha offers a natural solution. Experience the benefits of ancient wisdom backed by modern science. Trust nature. Trust ashwagandha. Go get this product at blackhotfirenetwork.com at the Sports and Nutrition Store.
$3.90, always promoting natural organic supplements, good for our Africanism and also as melanated people. Our natural organic foods that we consume are actually the best for us.
But the real scandal was his family's empire, built on public loot. As the 1970s dawned, Kenyatta's health faded, but his grip tightened. Succession plans whispered in Western embassies to ensure continuity. By the time Jomo Kenyatta passed in 1978, Kenya stood at a crossroads, its independence a hollow shell for many. His funeral was a spectacle of state pomp, attended by dignitaries who praised him as the founding father. But in the slums of Nairobi and the forgotten villages of the Rift Valley, a different story simmered. Dedan Kimathi's spirit lingered, a reminder of what could have been. Kimathi had embodied the raw essence of liberation. At 36, he faced death unbowed, his vision inspiring anti-colonial movements from Algeria to Vietnam.
Absolutely.
Kimathi is the true founding father.
Absolutely. When you're like anti-colonialism, I'm telling you, they'll definitely try to and get you. They'll try everything to actually get you. And it did have the likes of Sach who actually stood for the right thing. And it actually brings to this conversation about Africans that the fact that we do have leaders who paint that we are one people because of the agendas that they are pushing or basically for their own self-interest, but also our Africans believe they're one people with the same value system, or more or less normally translating this consciousness into practice is the difficult task. Yeah, because we do have individuals who do not want us to be one people. We do have a system that is governing Africa not to be united. But however, for Africans, it is a subtle question. Its theory is Pan Africanism, the idea that we can only succeed if we work collectively and support each other, both at the national and continental levels. I am because we are. However, the theory lies in its ability to drive solution to common challenges, especially those of strategic importance to the African people. Ubuntu theory without Ubuntu practice has left a vacuum that has been filled by foreigners, Europeans, Americans, and most recently the Chinese. And this has in turn discredited the theory even as Africans remain convinced that they are one and have shared aspiration for their way of life. If liberal democracy speaks to the aspiration for democracy and freedom for the West, then practical Pan Africanism, the practice of Ubuntu values, speaks to the aspiration for democracy and freedom for the Africans. It follows that in both societies, the thought and practice would move along in tandem, with the latter getting inspiration from the former and for institutional laws and education to preserve this way of life. If Africans pursue democracy and sovereignty in the manner that the Western way of life imagines them, it will gain neither, and the double consciousness will nurture a bipolar disorder in society. Indeed, such cognitive dissonance means crisis of identity and leadership, as well as a perpetual instability. In other words, a replay of the last half century of independence. And that's what's really happening right now when you see the likes of other individual collaborating
activist circles, decrying Kenyatta as a fraud propped up by the empire. Kenyatta's legacy was one of undermined potential. His regime sowed seeds of tribalism, corruption, and inequality that plague Kenya today. By prioritizing foreign capital and elite enrichment, he perpetuated neocolonialism. Mau Mau survivors sued Britain in 1999 for atrocities, winning a settlement in 2013, but Kenyatta's government had offered no support, leaving them to fight alone. His family's vast holdings became symbols of theft. Scandals involving land grabs and businesses fueled public outrage, with his son Uhuru later entangled in similar controversies. Hidden details emerged from archives. Kenyatta's anti-radical purges, detentions without trial, and alliances that stifled reform. He ignored pleas from veterans, allowing inequality to fester while preaching unity. Yet, Kimathi's ethos endures. In modern Kenya, movements for land justice invoke his name, challenging the elite stranglehold that Kenyatta entrenched. Historians like Caroline Elkins in Imperial Reckoning expose the emergency's horrors, reframing the narrative. Activists argue that recognizing Kimathi as the founding father would honor the radical roots of independence, addressing disparities born from betrayal. Not flag independence, but true Uhuru, they chant, echoing Kimathi's call. As the sun sets over Mount Kenya, one envisions a different history, where Kimathi's fighters shaped the nation, land flowed to the people, and freedom meant more than rhetoric. Kenyatta's story, polished by time, crumbles under scrutiny, a groomed Western puppet leader who traded revolution for power. In the end, both their statues grace the Nairobi streets, but one, standing, is a true pilgrimage for the oppressed, and another, sitting, a representation of greed, corrupt power, and tribalism.
That's what's actually happening in regards to the fraud leaders that we did have, and the narrative has always been the fact that they actually led us to independence. But I don't think we are independent. It doesn't feel like a very independent nation, country, continent. It doesn't at all. And you have to understand that, as I always say, we are the change you need to see in the world as Africans, as this generation. And I'm always talking about this. I'm always accolading this generation because they speak out, they question everything, they question leaders, they question systems, they question whatever agenda that is brought. They're actually very fast to speak out regardless. But also, I do have another video that I want to share right away right now in regards to the same conversation that we are having.
Let this dot represent 1 acre of land. It is roughly the size of a football field at 48,000 square feet. This is what 1,000 acres would look like. Imagine 1,000 football fields put together. Now, check this out. There's this family in Kenya that owns approximately 500,000 acres of land in the country. To put that figure in perspective, the total land size of London is approximately 386,000 acres. In fact, the largest city in California and one of the largest in the entire United States, which is Los Angeles, measures approximately 321,000 acres in total area. However, Just one family controls more than this in the African country of Kenya. They've managed to gain unrivaled influence over Kenya's land, business, and politics, built a vast empire of farms, banks, hotels, media houses, and industries, all while holding on to power for decades. But how did a family go from being relatively broke at independence to easily the richest in the country? I want to show you the incredible rise of the Kenyatta dynasty at the expense of the Kenyan people, from Jomo Kenyatta's presidency through the long reign of Daniel Arap Moi and into the era of Uhuru Kenyatta. We will trace how political power, land acquisitions, business ventures, and corruption allegations came to define the Kenyatta dynasty. This is the story of how the Kenyatta family captured Kenya. The story started in December 1963.
I, Jomo Kenyatta, being chosen and admitted to the cabinet in Kenya, do swear that I will be true and faithful to
Kenya had just gotten rid of British colonial rule. The people celebrated in wild independence jubilations. Jomo Kenyatta, once a freedom fighter, became the country's first prime minister and then president. The people loved this man. He gave them hope for the future, along with promises that he would return land to dispossessed Africans. However, about a year after the independence celebrations, things quickly began to unravel. With the British colonial settlers leaving, the young nation soon faced the challenging task of redistributing land held by those departing Brits, who were majorly farmers. After several options were considered, Kenyatta's government launched something called the Million Acre Settlement Scheme, based on the willing buyer, willing seller principle. This simply means a transaction is only valid if both the buyer and the seller freely and voluntarily agree to the terms of the sale. That includes the price, of course. To make this process easier, the British government financed land buyouts, and land was sold to African farmers rather than being forcibly taken over by the government. There were loans given out for this very purpose. In practice, however, those with political connections sort of took advantage of this program. President Kenyatta and his close allies reportedly used this opportunity to acquire extensive lands during the 1960s and 1970s. Through loans and state-facilitated purchases, Kenyatta's family obtained large farms, particularly in Kenyatta's home district of Kiambu and the Fertile Rift Valley. And this self-enrichment was made possible largely due to something surprising that this ex-freedom fighter turned president did early on when he came into power. You see, Jomo Kenyatta, who was considered a father of the new nation, quickly banned all political activities and instead established a one-party state dominated by his Kikuyu ethnic group. By the late 1960s, Kenyatta's inner circle, sometimes dubbed the Kiambu Mafia or Mount Kenya Mafia, dominated both politics and commerce, occupying key posts in government and parastatals. The promise of democracy quickly faded. The Kikuyu, who made up around 20% of the population, held most of the country's important government and administrative positions. This contributed to a perception among many Kenyans that independence had simply seen the dominance of a British elite replaced by the dominance of a Kikuyu elite. Among these Kikuyu elites were close relatives and trusted lieutenants, such as Biu Koinange, Kenyatta's brother-in-law and Minister of State. We have Dr. Njoroge Mungai, a cousin and minister, and others who used their influence to amass wealth alongside the president. Together, they invested in agriculture, banking, and import-export ventures, installing themselves as Kenya's post-colonial economic elite. In this period, land was the most coveted asset in all of Kenya, and the Kenyatta family took note of that. Soon enough, with one crooked deal after another, the family emerged as the country's largest landowner. By 1978, Mama Njina Kenyatta, Jomo's fourth wife and first lady, personally owned around 115,000 hectares of land, that is approximately 284,000 acres, across all of Kenya. This staggering figure, cited in declassified US intelligence reports, was far more than the roughly 4,000 hectares held by President Kenyatta himself. Mama Ngina's holding included a 13,000 hectares ranch in Kiambu, two large tea plantations at Matu and Mango. She also had 3 estates near the Tanzanian border and another large holding at Kenya's coast. Much of this land was acquired through the willing buyer program or as compensation deals with departing colonials. However, they were often financed by government settlement funds meant to assist land.
And it actually shows you right now we are talking about protecting foreign interests, or whilst the individual said protecting the colonizer's interest. And if it's actually so easy, if one individual owns a large amount of land or property, because it's actually easier to call the shots, because we actually know that's also kind of like protecting the interest of foreigners. But as we are almost coming to the end of the show in a while, how can we regain the Ubuntu spirit? How can we do that? Because we always talk about the fact that we think we are one, we have one values. I see that, I've always said that. I see that in this generation. It's happening. We are one common vision goal. People are woke, they question things. But how can we actually intentionally regain the Ubuntu spirit? And this is what I found out. We can actually regain the Ubuntu spirit. Now, this is how you can do it. People must shift from individualism to a focus on community and pray, or basically focus on community. Embrace empathy and compassion, support elders and heritage, engage in acts of generosity and solidarity, and commit to personal transformation to foster a more connected and caring society. This involves a conscious effort to prioritize the interests of others, promote fairness, and take responsibility for the well being of the collective community. We do also have ways we can embrace transformation and mindset shift. That's how it starts. We have to shift our minds. We have to decolonize our mindset. So, number one, we have to reject individualism. Consciously move away from the self centeredness and a fear driven mindset towards a more open, trusting perception of others and the world. Widen your circle of compassion. Extend empathy and care to all living beings, not just those near you, or basically near to you, to develop a more holistic and compassionate worldview. Also, commit to action. Ubuntu requires consistent